After I retired, my son kicked me out of my own house, saying he needed the space for himself. I packed my bag and left in silence. A month later, he was evicted and lost the house, and found himself with no car, no money, and no roof over his head. My retirement wasn't a sudden event. It was a milestone I'd been working towards for 40 years. A finish line I saw not with a sense of dread, but with quiet anticipation. I was a man of routines, of careful plans and meticulous execution, forged by a lifetime of working as an engineer for the city's waterworks department. I knew how to build things to last, how to ensure the foundation was solid, and how to fix a leak before it became a flood. My life had been a testament to this principle. I had a comfortable pension, a small but tidy nest egg, and most importantly, a fully paid-off house on a quiet, tree-lined street. This house was more than just a building. It was the physical embodiment of my life's work, the shelter I had built for my late wife and our son, David. It was the legacy I had intended to pass on, not as a handout, but as a gift of security. My vision for my golden years was a simple one. I wanted to putter in my garage, the air thick with the smell of sawdust and varnish as I turned forgotten pieces of wood into functional art. I wanted to tend to the rose bushes my wife had planted, their vibrant petals a constant living reminder of her. I wanted to fish on the lake, the silence broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the boat. I'd imagined Sunday afternoons filled with the easy laughter of my son, David, and his family, the smell of barbecue smoke mingling with the scent of blooming flowers. I had spent my life building a haven, and now I was finally ready to enjoy it. That peace, however, was shattered faster than a dropped plate. My son David had always been a man of grand ambitions and little follow-through. He had a taste for luxury, expensive cars, designer clothes, and fine dining, but lacked the work ethic to earn them. For years I had quietly and foolishly supported him. I covered his credit card bills, paid for his car repairs, and bailed him out of one financial crisis after another. I always justified it to myself, thinking that's what a good father does. But with each financial rescue, David's sense of entitlement grew, while his gratitude, a plant already struggling for sunlight, withered entirely. I was a wallet he could call on, not a father to be respected. A week after my retirement party, David showed up unannounced. He didn't bring a celebratory cake or a bottle of whiskey to toast my new chapter. Instead, he carried a sheath of papers and wore a determined, cold look in his eyes. "Dad?" he said, his voice as smooth and calculated as a stone skipping across a pond. "I've been thinking, now that you're retired, you don't really need all this space, do you? The old armchair where I'd read him bedtime stories. The wall where we had measured his height year after year. What are you talking about, son? This is my home. I'm talking about the house. Look, Chloe and I are expecting a second child. We need more room. My current apartment is too small and the rent is astronomical. It only makes sense for us to move in here." "You mean all of you?" "Of course, you're welcome to stay for as long as you need, but what about me?" "Dad, don't be naive. This is a 5-bedroom house. I can't have you living here with us. It would be a nightmare. You'd get in the way. Besides, with your pension, you can easily find a nice little apartment somewhere." He gestured dismissively with the hand holding the papers. "A retirement home, maybe. You know, a place with other people your age. A retirement home. As if I were an old broken-down piece of furniture to be discarded." "David," I said, my voice barely a whisper, the words catching in my throat, "I paid for this house with my own hands. I worked for 40 years for this. It's my legacy, but a legacy is meant to be passed on. I'm just expediting the process. The sooner you move out, the sooner we can start our new life here." The papers he held were a gift deed, a document designed to transfer the property to him. He wanted me to sign it, to willingly give him my home. He had already spoken to a real estate agent about a quick sale of his apartment, and had even lined up a moving truck. The only thing missing was my signature. My consent. I refused. My son's face twisted into a mask of anger and frustration. He raised his voice, shouting about how ungrateful I was for holding his family back. He told me I was a selfish old man clinging to bricks and mortar. The argument went on for hours, a shouting match that left me exhausted and hollow. I couldn't believe the man who I had raised, the child I had sacrificed so much for, could look at me with such contempt. "Fine," he finally spat, his face red with fury. "I'll do it the hard way." He had found a loophole, a small legal technicality that allowed him to claim ownership of the house due to a poorly worded clause in my late wife's old will. It was a flimsy claim, but he had a lawyer who was willing to push it. I had a choice: fight him in court, spend my pension on legal fees, and drag our family name through the mud, or I chose the latter. I didn't want a war. I had no fight left in me. I was tired of fighting for a son who had no love for me. So on a cold Tuesday morning, with a single suitcase holding my clothes and a small box of my late wife's photos, I walked out of the house I had built. David was there, watching from the window, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph on his face. I didn't say a word. I just walked to my car, got in, and drove away. As I drove away from the home I had built with my own hands, the sting of betrayal turned into a cold, hard resolve. David saw me as a naive old man, a pushover who would bend to his will. He believed I had no fight in me. He believed I was a burden he could easily discard. He was wrong, so very wrong. My pension was secure. My bank accounts were private, and I had a lifetime of experience and knowledge he knew nothing about. As I drove, my mind, once numb with grief, began to whir. I started to formulate a plan not born of anger, but of a quiet, calculated need for justice. I would not fight him with lawyers and angry words. I would fight him with his own greed and his own arrogance. I would let him believe he had won, and then I would show him just how much I had been holding back. David wanted the house. He wanted the legacy I had built. He wanted it all without earning a single cent of it. He was about to learn a very hard lesson about what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. He had kicked me out of my home. Now I would make sure he was left with nothing but the clothes on his back, and a month later he would lose it all. My quiet resolve solidified into an iron will. The game had just begun. A month passed, and I settled into my new life with a quiet resolve that David, in his self-absorbed arrogance, completely mistook for resignation. He believed I had simply given up, that I was a sad old man living in a cozy apartment, a burden he had successfully offloaded. I saw the evidence of his new life through the lens of social media, a digital window into the very home he had stolen from me. Pictures flooded my feed. David and his wife, Chloe, triumphantly painting the walls of my old study, tearing out the perfectly good kitchen cabinets to modernize the space with a sterile, cold aesthetic, and hosting a housewarming party where they toasted to their new beginning. They were happy, or so they thought, celebrating a victory that was nothing more than a momentary illusion. Their happiness, however, was built on a foundation of sand, and I, the quiet observer from the sidelines, was about to watch it all wash away. The serene, furnished apartment in a quiet part of town was indeed a temporary refuge, but it was not where I would spend my final years. It was merely a base of operations, a strategic hideout. My plan was already in motion, and it had begun just hours after I had packed that single suitcase and driven away. The sting of betrayal had not faded, but it had transmuted into a cold, hard focus. This was no longer about fighting David with shouting and legal fees. It was about outsmarting him with a meticulous, calculated countermove. The first step, taken on the very same Tuesday I left my home, was a visit to my old friend and lawyer, George. He was a man of integrity, a veteran of countless legal battles, and he listened to my story with a grave face, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. As I recounted David's cruel demands and the callous eviction, I saw a flicker of genuine anger in his eyes. He didn't just see a client, he saw a friend who had been wronged. "I want to make sure David and Chloe have no legal right to anything I own," I told him, my voice steady despite the raw emotion bubbling just beneath the surface. "No inheritance, no claim to my bank accounts, nothing. We can set up a trust. It's ironclad. All your liquid assets, your savings, your pension fund, your investments, will be placed in the trust, and you will be the sole beneficiary. When you pass, the funds will go to a charity of your choosing. This trust is legally separate from your estate, making it untouchable. David will be left with nothing." I transferred every penny, ensuring my worldly possessions were now hidden behind a legal veil, untouchable by my son's greedy hands. I also changed all my bank account passwords and security questions, a minor but crucial detail. The second piece of the puzzle involved the house itself. David had won the fight for the house by claiming it was his mother's legacy, and therefore his. What he didn't know was that my wife, bless her kind soul, had included a small but crucial clause in her old will. A clause that David, in his haste and arrogance, had completely overlooked. It stipulated that the house could not be sold for a period of 10 years after her death, and more importantly, that during my lifetime, it could not be used for commercial purposes. David, in his self-important arrogance, had already begun talking about renting out the guest bedrooms to a tech company as a co-working space. I had proof of this, text messages and emails he had brazenly sent to potential clients, which were now in the hands of my lawyer. This was the key. David had claimed the house under the pretense of it being a family home, a place for his growing family, but his real intention was to use it as a source of income, a profitable venture built on my back. This was a direct violation of the will, and it was the first crack in his fragile foundation. I had a meeting with George and a private investigator, a young, sharp man named Jake who had a knack for finding things that people thought were hidden. Jake went through David's social media, his business accounts, and his communications with potential partners. He found countless pieces of evidence, all of which showed David's intention to use the house for commercial gain. The proof was damning, and it was all legally obtained. The third and most critical piece of the plan was a small, unassuming safe deposit box I had kept at my bank for years. Inside, I had kept my original will, which had been drafted long before David had shown his true colors, and which left my entire estate to him. But I had also kept a revised will, a quiet, meticulously crafted document, signed, dated, and notarized just a week before David kicked me out. This new will left everything to a small animal shelter I had volunteered at for years, a place where kindness and loyalty were valued above all else. David didn't know about the safe deposit box or the new will. He assumed my old will was the only one. He believed he was the rightful heir to my entire life's work, a belief that would soon become his undoing. As the weeks went on, David grew more arrogant. He would occasionally text me demanding my car keys, saying he needed a second vehicle for Chloe. I ignored the texts. He would send me condescending messages saying he was happy for me that I was finding myself in my new, cozy apartment. The arrogance was palpable. He had no idea that I was not living in a cozy apartment, but in a quiet hotel with a beautiful view of the lake, paid for with the money from the trust he believed was his for the taking. He was also completely unaware that I had a team of professionals, a lawyer, a private investigator, working on his downfall. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when I received a letter from the city's tax office. David had failed to pay the property taxes on the house for the previous year. He had told me he had paid them, but I had a hunch, a gut feeling that his greed and short-sightedness would be his downfall. He had been so focused on getting the house that he had forgotten to take care of the small but vital details. I had paid them myself, but I had kept a copy of the receipt and a letter from the city stating that the tax debt was now mine to deal with. It was the perfect final piece of evidence I needed to show his irresponsibility and negligence. I felt a pang of sadness as I thought about what I was doing to my own son, but then I would remember his cold, hard eyes as he told me to get out of my own home, his triumphant grin as he watched me drive away, and the pictures of him and Chloe celebrating their victory. The pang of sadness would turn into a quiet, cold resolve. This was not about revenge. It was about justice. It was about teaching my son a lesson he would never forget, a lesson about the value of family, the importance of respect, and the true cost of greed. The storm was coming, and he was about to be caught in the eye of it, and I would be watching from a safe and very comfortable distance. My patience was not a weakness. It was a weapon, and it was about to detonate. The unraveling began subtly, a quiet hum in the background of David's life that he, in his blissful ignorance, initially dismissed as a minor inconvenience. His world, so carefully constructed on a foundation of stolen triumph and misplaced confidence, began to show its first hairline fractures. The calm he felt was a fragile shell, and the cracks were starting to form in places he never thought to look. The first hint of trouble arrived in a small brown envelope from the city's tax office. It was a gentle reminder that the property taxes on the house were overdue. David scoffed. He remembered me telling him I had paid them just before I left. He assumed it was a bureaucratic mix-up and, with a dismissive wave of his hand, called the city to clear up the mistake. He was met not with an apology, but with a cold, formal voice on the other end of the line. "Mr. Johnson, the taxes for the previous year were paid," the clerk confirmed. "However, the account has been flagged for anomalies. We have a letter from the original owner stating that he paid the taxes for the property, but is no longer responsible for them." The original owner, he knew exactly who that was. He hung up, a knot of unease forming in his stomach. He had used my name to claim ownership of the house, but he had failed to change the name on the property taxes. He assumed the city's paperwork would simply catch up. He was wrong. The account was now in a state of limbo, and the city, a machine of slow but relentless bureaucracy, was about to send a very different kind of letter. He paid the overdue taxes with a credit card, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Next, his phone calls to his lawyer became increasingly frantic. The lawyer, a slick, expensive man named Mr. Harrington, had helped David with the eviction. Now he was telling David that the gift deed was being re-examined. David's voice, usually laced with a thick layer of entitlement, was now a mix of anger and panic. "What do you mean, re-examined?" David demanded, his voice rising in pitch. "It was signed and notarized. It's a done deal." "Johnson, there are complications," the lawyer said, his voice unusually strained. "A telltale sign of a man about to lose a very expensive suit. A clause in your mother's will. It's an old document, but it's legally binding. It stipulates that the property cannot be used for commercial purposes for a period of 10 years. He had already signed a lease with a tech company, and the first payment was due in a week. He had already spent the money from the sale of his apartment on the renovation of my house, believing it was a sure thing. He called the tech company hoping to renegotiate to buy himself some time. But the company, wary of a legal dispute and smelling trouble, had already backed out of the deal. The first domino had fallen, taking with it his only source of income. The next domino was a small brown envelope from the city's water department. It was a fine for a non-compliance issue, a broken water pipe in the garden. It was a minor leak, but one that David, in his hubris, had ignored. I had fixed it a decade ago, but David had neglected the upkeep. He called the city furious, only to be told that the leak had been reported anonymously, and the fine was non-negotiable. He paid it, but the seed of doubt had grown into a gnawing suspicion. Was I behind this? He had no proof, but the coincidences were starting to pile up. The final domino, and the one that would prove to be the most devastating, was a letter from a legal firm, delivered by a solemn-faced courier. It was a summons to court. A lawsuit had been filed by a local animal shelter, the very one I had volunteered at for years. The lawsuit alleged that David had illegally taken possession of the house and had violated the terms of my mother's will. The lawsuit also stated that the animal shelter was the sole beneficiary of my new will, and that I had a right to my property. David's world, so carefully constructed on a foundation of greed and deceit, began to crumble. He called me, his voice a desperate, panicked whisper. The phone, which had been silent for a month, now rang with the sound of a man on the brink of collapse. "Dad, what is this? A lawsuit? A will? What's going on?" I just listened. The silence on the other end of the line, a confirmation of his panic. "Dad, please. This is a joke, right? You're playing some kind of sick game with me," he pleaded, his voice cracking with fear. "It's not a game, David," I finally said, my voice calm and steady. "It's a lesson." "A lesson? What lesson?" "I'm your son. You can't do this to me. You called me a burden. You told me I was in the way. You wanted my house, my legacy, my life, and you were willing to do anything to get it. You were willing to break your father's heart. I'm your son," he screamed, his voice a mix of rage and despair. "I am a father, David," I said, my voice firm. "And a father's greatest duty is to teach his son right from wrong, and I'm afraid I've failed. But I'm going to try and fix that. I'm going to teach you a lesson about dignity, respect, and the consequences of your actions." I had no fight left in me. I was not angry. I was not sad. I was simply resolved. I had done what I had to do. David had been given a chance to do the right thing, and he had chosen not to. Now he would face the consequences of that choice. The seeds of his own destruction had been planted by his own hands, and I was simply watching them grow. He had wanted a new life. He was about to get one. A life without a home, without a car, and without a father. The storm was here, and he was about to be swept away. The day of the court hearing arrived. A grim, gray day that matched the mood in the courtroom. It was a day of reckoning, not just for David, but for the legacy of a family that had been broken by greed. I sat in the front row, a silent observer, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, watching the scene unfold. David, pale and sweating, sat at the defense table with his lawyer, Mr. Harrington. The expensive suit Harrington wore looked a size too big, as if he were already shedding the trappings of a losing battle. Across the aisle, my lawyer, George, sat with a calm, confident expression, the quiet authority of a man who knew he held all the cards. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with a stern face and an air of quiet power, called the case. George began his opening statement, his voice clear and concise. He laid out the facts like a meticulous engineer, each point a solid, unshakable beam in a structure of undeniable truth. He spoke of my years of hard work, my sacrifices, and David's illegal eviction of me. He spoke of the gift deed that David had tried to manipulate me into signing, a document that was now a testament to his greed. "Your Honor," George concluded, his voice resonating with a quiet intensity, "Mr. Johnson, the defendant, acted out of pure greed. He saw his father as a burden, a man to be discarded, and he used a legal loophole to take his home. But he failed to account for a simple but crucial fact. The house was not just his father's legacy, it was also his mother's, and she, in her infinite wisdom, had made sure that it could not be used for profit, but only for the good of the family. The defendant's actions have not only violated the spirit of the will, but the letter of the law." Harrington stood to defend his client. He stammered, his voice weak and unconvincing. He argued that David had acted in good faith, that he had a right to the house, and that I was a bitter old man trying to ruin his son's life. "This is nothing more than a father-son dispute, Your Honor," he said, his voice cracking. "A petty squabble over property, a disagreement that has been escalated by a bitter, vengeful man." She looked at the evidence, the emails, the texts, the lease agreement with the tech company, all of which Jake, the private investigator, had so meticulously uncovered. The evidence proved David's true intentions, to use the house for commercial gain, a direct violation of my late wife's will. She then looked at the property tax receipt I had paid, and the letter from the city, which proved David's irresponsibility and negligence. She shook her head, A slow, deliberate movement that felt like a final, damning judgment. "Mr. Johnson," she said, her voice a cold, hard stone, "the evidence against you is overwhelming. You have not only violated the terms of your mother's will, but you have acted with a complete disregard for the well-being of your father. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. The house is to be returned to its rightful owner. Furthermore, you will be required to pay the plaintiff a sum of $100,000 in damages for emotional distress and legal fees. You are also required to vacate the premises within 24 hours. The court is adjourned." David's face, a moment ago filled with a flicker of hope, fell into a mask of pure shock. He looked at me, his eyes wide and terrified. He had lost. He had lost everything. The house, the money, the life he had so eagerly stolen. He had lost it all. As he walked out of the courtroom, he looked like a ghost. He was no longer the arrogant, entitled man who had kicked me out of my home. He was a broken, defeated man who had learned a very hard lesson. He had seen the truth, and the truth had broken him. The poetic justice, however, was not yet complete. As David left the courtroom, he was served with another set of legal papers. It was a notice from the bank. Because he had spent the money from his apartment sale on the renovation of my house, he had no savings left. And because he had no house, he had no collateral for the loan he had taken out to start his new business. The bank, seeing a man with no assets and no income, had seized his car. He was now, for the first time in his life, completely and utterly alone. I watched from a distance as he walked out into the rain. He stood on the curb, a defeated figure with no home to go to, no car to drive, and no money to his name. He was a man with no roof over his head, a man who had lost everything because of his own greed. He had wanted a new life. He was about to get one. I felt a sense of satisfaction, a quiet inner peace. I had not done this out of anger or revenge. I had done it out of a need for justice. I had shown him what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness, and I had done it without raising a single hand or a single voice. I had done it with a quiet, calculated, and meticulous plan. And now I was free. I had my home back, my dignity restored, and my legacy secure. The game was over, and I had won. The aftermath of the court hearing was a quiet affair, a stark and welcome contrast to the storm that had consumed my life for the past month. I moved back into my home, but not alone. I had hired a team of movers, a group of strong, polite young men who worked with a silent efficiency. As they carefully carried boxes of my belongings back inside, I found myself watching them with a new sense of purpose. The house, once a source of pain and betrayal, was now a canvas for a new beginning. I started by getting rid of the sterile, cold furniture David and Chloe had bought. I replaced the gaudy modern art with the warm, familiar paintings my wife and I had collected over the years. I spent hours in my garage sanding and varnishing the woodworking projects I had abandoned, the familiar scent of wood and lacquer a soothing balm to my soul. In the process of rebuilding my life, I had also reconnected with an old friend, a woman named Sarah. She had lost her husband a few years back, and our shared grief had created an unspoken bond between us. She was a kind, gentle soul who had always had a soft spot for me, and as we started spending time together, going on walks in the park, talking about our lives and sharing stories about our families, I realized that I was not as alone as I had thought. One day, as we were sitting on the porch, a warm cup of tea in my hands, I told her about what had happened with David. I recounted the whole story from the day he kicked me out to the final, devastating court hearing. She listened, her eyes filled with sympathy and understanding, never interrupting, never judging. "You did the right thing," she said, her voice soft and sure. "You taught him a lesson he needed to learn, a lesson about respect and dignity." They were a confirmation that I had not acted out of malice or revenge, but out of a need for self-preservation. I had not wanted to hurt my son. I had only wanted to protect myself and my legacy. Her quiet support gave me the strength to finally let go of the anger and resentment I had been holding on to for so long. David, however, was not doing so well. I heard through the grapevine that he had been kicked out of his in-laws' house and that he was now living on the street. His wife Chloe had left him, taking the kids with her. She had been disgusted by his actions and had found a new, more responsible man to be her partner. David, the man who had always lived a life of luxury and entitlement, was now a man with no home, no family, and no future. His poetic justice was complete, a direct result of his own choices. One day I received a phone call from a social worker. David had been arrested for panhandling and was in jail. He had no money for a lawyer and no one to bail him out. The social worker told me that he had given my number as his only contact. I thought about it for a long moment, the phone heavy in my hand. I could have easily ignored the call, let him rot in jail. But I was a father, and a father's duty, no matter how much pain he has caused, is never truly over. I went to the jail and I talked to him through a glass partition. He was no longer the arrogant, entitled man who had kicked me out of my home. He was a broken, defeated man, his face gaunt, his eyes filled with a hollow despair. "Dad," he said, his voice a whisper, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know. I did not give him money. I did not give him a home. I did not give him a car. I gave him a chance to start over. I told him that I would not be a part of his new life, but that I would always be there if he needed help. I told him that he had to learn to stand on his own 2 feet, and that he had to earn his way back into my life." He nodded, his eyes filled with tears, the tears of a man who had lost everything but had finally found a glimmer of hope. He knew what he had to do. He knew that he had to rebuild his life from the ground up, on a foundation of hard work and respect, and for the first time in his life he had a chance to do so. I left the jail, a sense of peace settling over me. I had not given him everything. I had not given him a handout. I had given him a chance to earn back his dignity, and that was all I could do. I went back to my home, a place of peace and tranquility. I spent my days working on my woodworking projects, tending to my roses, and going on walks with Sarah. My life was simple, but it was full. I had my dignity, my home, and my peace, and I had learned a valuable lesson. The greatest legacy a father can leave his son is not a house or money or a car. It is the legacy of dignity, respect, and the knowledge that true happiness is not found in what you take, but in what you earn. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had truly earned my peace.